Very nice to see again one of our webinars in person after a long time. Welcome for the special IC-XTBG webinar. Let me just do a bit of general introduction first, and then I will introduce our speakers, the topic of our seminar today. So then this is a part of our Integrative Conservation special webinar series. As you know, Integrative Conservation is XTBG's relatively new journal. We launched in December 2022, and we will publish next week our September issue, the 8th issue we publish on the journal. And I hope all of you are familiar with the journal, the papers we published, and I hope you read and are concerned about submitting papers. Why to publish here is integrative, it has high quality, has a global reach and accessibility, and it is open access and right now free to publish. So we have right now several open calls for special issues. We have a special issue on environmental education or nature education. And we have also a special issue on current and emerging conservation issues in Africa. We very much welcome ideas for new special issues, guest editors. If any one of you is keen on having a special collection on something, rapid evolution and conservation, so then please talk to us. We very much welcome those suggestions. And you can find more about the journal on social media, on our website. And as you know, we have this series is part of the XTBG weekly seminar series, but we also do once a month has the Integrative Conservation brand. We invite international high-level, high-profile speakers. We have speakers like Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Bill Sutherland, E.J. Miller-Golan. And again, we welcome suggestions of future speakers. If there is anyone who you know is very exciting and you want us to invite, just let us know. So then, yeah, please check our website and think about submitting. And of course, please read our papers. So let's go to today's seminar. Today we have two speakers. The format will be slightly different to other seminars. We'll do is a bit shorter presentation than usual. So we'll do is we'll have two around 30-minute presentations, and then I join Q&A with both speakers. First, we'll have Dr. Kim McConkey talking about the place of megafauna within the frugivore community. And second, we will have Dr. Nadine Ruppert talking about primates, pesticides, and palm oil, an integrative One Health approach to foster wildlife-friendly plantation management in Malaysia. So then I will introduce Kim McConkey. Just briefly, Kim McConkey is a very, very close collaborator of mine, someone that I personally admire a lot. It's a great pleasure having her for second time, giving a seminar for us. Second time. So then Kim is broadly interested in mammal communities and the ecological roles they perform across tropical Asia. She has worked in many countries in Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, India. She does a lot of work on seed dispersal, and she has worked with many people, many Asian students. She's very, very popular among students, among people in the landscape. So she's an independent researcher. She has a very, very nice situation. She's currently affiliated with biotech in Thailand. So yeah, Kim, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm here visiting the Megafauna Ecology and Conservation Group. So I thought it would be fitting to actually talk about megafauna. And I'm going to talk about their role in seed dispersal and how they compare to other animals in that same community. Not good? Is that better? No, I'm too short.
Should be working, right? Just get it close to you.
Okay. So I study seed dispersal. So seed dispersal is a process in which the seeds are moved away from a parent tree or a parent plant. And it's really important for maintaining ecosystems because there's often a zone of high mortality under or close to the parent plant. So if that seed is going to germinate and grow, it generally has to be moved away. So seed dispersal is essential for restoration because these degraded habitats, they can't regenerate that habitat unless the seeds can reach there. And it's also very important for climate change. So now we have all these species distribution modeling that says that this plant will grow here under this climate scenario. But unless the seeds can move and track that climate change, those scenarios can't actually be realized. So I'm going to be talking today about tropical forests. And in tropical forests, most trees rely on animals for seed dispersal. And that's because most plants have traits which are there to attract animals to eat them. So that's what? No, sorry, the wrong way. So I work with mammals, and I'm going to be fairly much just talking about mammals today. I think mammals are pretty awesome. Not only are they play really important roles as seed dispersers, but they're really interesting because they're very complicated handling behavior that makes them very difficult to study, but also very interesting. So I want to mention these very briefly now because they come important a little later in the talk. So most people study endozoochory, which is when the animal swallows a fruit and later defecates it or regurgitates it. But many animals also carry the fruits out from away from the fruiting tree in their limbs, in their mouth or their beak, and in this case, in the very, very full cheek pouches of this monkey. And if this is done for immediate consumption, we call it stomatochory. If it's done with a seed and that seed is later hoarded, we call it synzoochory, because this is also a valid method of seed dispersal. So, sorry, I'll get it right soon. So another really important aspect of studying seed dispersal is to understand what these roles are in the community. So I began my main research career studying these animals, gibbons, and their role as seed dispersers. And I spent about 14 months in the forests of Borneo following these animals. They ate a lot of fruit, they defecated a lot of seeds. Every single dung contained seeds. But I was a bit dissatisfied at the end of my study, even though I concluded they were good seed dispersers, because I didn't know what anyone else in that community was actually doing. So if the other animals were doing just as good a job as the gibbons, then it meant that these animals were not so important after all. So this is what I want to do today with megafauna. So we know megafauna play some really pivotal roles in the ecosystems. They're really large bodied. That means they have a huge physical presence on the landscapes and the ecosystems. And they can eat a lot of fruit as well, which of course translates into important ecological functions. So one of these functions is seed dispersal. So most of the information we have on megafauna comes from elephants, particularly in Asia. They're very ubiquitous across the landscapes. And so just about everything published is on elephants. And from that information, we know they eat a lot of fruit. This is, of course, important to seed dispersal. They also eat and disperse large fruits and seeds. So this is also really important because we know that the larger the fruit and seeds, the fewer other dispersers there are. And this is a photo of, oh, and let me go back. So this photo here is one of Lisa Ong, who's sitting down here in the front. And this is a mango-sized fruit called Ervingia malleana. And these seed pile you see on the left there came out of a single elephant dung. Now, no other animal can disperse that many mango-sized fruits. It's pretty impressive. They also move seeds over really long distances. They're large, they have large home ranges, and they have long gut passage times. So wherever they pick up a seed, it will be defecated somewhere very far from that original tree. And we know this is important for seed dispersal because it helps to connect metapopulations of plants and helps to enhance genetic diversity. And then, of course, when they are deposited, they're deposited with a lot of fertilizer, the dung, which helps them grow. But megafauna, they're herbivores, they're not frugivores. Their main diet is not actually fruit. And this camera is actually at a fruiting tree. The fruit's not very big. It's kind of, you can't see it for the grass. But most of my, so the elephants stop occasionally to eat it, but most of my videos, the elephants are just walking on by. And many fruiting plants, they never stop to eat. So they share the forest with many other fruit-eating animals. And so I want to see how they actually compare in the end. How important are they at a community level? So today I want to compare dispersal parameters of megafauna versus other mammals, compare their importance in 4 communities for which I have some data for across Southeast Asia, and at the end just briefly discuss these mega fruits, these very large fruits, and rhinos in more detail. So just so we're all on the same page about what I'm talking about when I talk about megafauna, there's generally 2 definitions given, greater than 44 kg and greater than 1000 kg. So there was a paper published a few years ago, I think Hintzer is a co-author on this, that said we should define the megafauna for each use. So what I'm doing here is I'm using a cutoff of 500 kg, which is a value that my colleagues and I came up with a few years ago for a paper. We wanted to exclude the animals that couldn't swallow the largest fruits in the forest. So this 44 kg cutoff, like the bear, the pigs, the deer, they can't swallow the various large fruit, as I'll show you. So I'm calling them here large herbivores. And 1000 kg was a little high to capture their Sumatran rhino, which on average is smaller than that and is quite highly frugivorous. So in the past, the megafaunal assemblages in Asia were pretty diverse, really amazing. But now, of course, extinction has reduced this to 1 elephant species, 3 rhino species, the Javan, the greater one-horned, and the Sumatran. These are, of course, all very low density now and very restricted distributions. And it also includes, that cutoff includes some large bovid species as well. So with these species, these are the ones I'm going to focus on today as megafauna. And I'm going to compare the parameters, the seed size they're able to be dispersed, the dispersal distances, the degree of frugivory among them and other mammals. So first of all, seed sizes dispersed. So the large herbivores I'm looking at, so here I'm just looking at endozoochori, the seeds that are swallowed. And so I'm looking at the largest animals in the community. And aside from the megafauna, they're the tapir, the samba deer, 3 species of bear occur in Asia, the orangutan, and the pigs. So what this figure is showing you is body mass on the log scale. So you can see the differences a bit better, and the largest seed width that these animals are able to disperse. And this information comes from across tropical Asia. So you can see first, there's about 4 species down here. They include the bovid, 1 megafauna, which are kind of dispersing the smaller seeds, although sometimes they can disperse some pretty impressive seeds. These animals differ in another way too, because they're actually all, to some extent, seed predators. So there's a lot of species they disperse, a lot of species they eat, which they do not disperse but destroy the seeds. Then we've got the bears and the samba deer, which are they can, for their size, they're dispersing some pretty impressive seeds, but they don't come anywhere close to the rhinos and the elephants, which by far, they stand alone in dispersing the largest seeds in the community by endozoochori. So now I want to look within an actual community. And this data comes from Lisa Ong's PhD thesis, who is here at IC-XTBG. So what I'm showing you here, the community is Royal Bailum State Park in Peninsular Malaysia. And what I'm showing you here is a different bar, is a different animal taxa. And I'm showing you the largest seed width that they can disperse. So I'm showing you gray indicates endozoochori, and yellow indicates they're carrying the seed out, but not actually swallowing it. So you can see the largest seeds are dispersed by elephants. They're the only animal that can disperse seeds by endozoochori in this community. There were rhinos here, they've gone extinct, so we couldn't sample them, of course. But they weren't the only animal that can disperse these large seeds. There are actually many others, the murid rodents, the squirrels, the bats, which can also move these large seeds just by carrying them, which of course has consequences for dispersal distances as well. So we can conclude megafauna can disperse larger seeds than any other animal by endozoochori, but some smaller animals can also disperse large seeds by carrying them away. Now, the dispersal distances. So these are the maximum dispersal distances that have been recorded across Asia from various sites. So again, just the megafauna, the elephants and the rhinos kind of stand alone, really exceptionally long maximum distances of 5 kilometers or more, which is well over what we consider to be the cutoff required to be a long distance seed disperser. So they're like super long distance seed dispersers almost. The bovids also are dispersing seeds over this. This is not a great indication though, which is why I've started, because this is for domestic bovids. Perhaps the wild ones can disperse seeds even further. So how this compares to the rest of the animals, most of them are well below the 1 kilometer cutoff. And if I'd shown you averages, they probably would have all been below 1 kilometer cutoff. But the primates occasionally can move seeds over long distances as well, but certainly not with the frequency of the megafauna. And we don't currently have estimates for tapir or pigs from Asia. But these animals are probably particularly important for local seed dispersal. So it's quite also an important role because they're probably maintaining those ecosystems or those habitats close to them, immediate areas. So we can conclude megafauna are potentially the main or only long distance dispersers among mammals, but smaller animals contribute most to local seed dispersal. So then finally, the degree of frugivory. And so this is just a rough kind of comparison among the animals from low to high frugivory. I started looking at Alton traits to do this, but it wasn't very useful. So then I used various published papers and some unpublished data too from how often we see these in front of the cameras. So clearly at the low end of the scale are the megafauna. The published work suggests that around 10% of dungs of the elephants and rhinos contain seeds, but this is obviously very highly seasonal, highly habitat dependent, and maybe in some landscapes it's probably even lower than that. The large mammals are mostly around the medium range. The orangutan can be highly frugivorous if we include the seeds in its diet as well. We don't really know much about tapir. And the medium and small mammals are much, much higher. They tend to be at the high end of the spectrum, particularly the primates, which can have 70% of their diet as fruit. They're preferentially frugivorous, these ones that are also dispersing seeds. So from this, we can conclude that megafauna are among the least frugivorous of seed dispersers within the community. No real surprises. But how does this look when we look within communities? So now I want to just look how they compare across 4 communities for which there is data collected, for which I have some role in this data collection. So the first one is Royal Belum State Park in Peninsular Malaysia. This is mast fruiting dipterocarp forest. So it has real periods of highs in fruiting and then long periods of scarcity. And it has lots of megafaunal fruits in this community and lots of large animals and lots of rodents as well. So then we have Khao Yai National Park in Thailand. This is tropical semi-evergreen forest. It's superannual fruiting. So what this means is most plants don't fruit yearly, but there's always something there. It doesn't have the periods of scarcity that the dipterocarp forest has. And it has lots of frugivores in this habitat. And then we have Paki Tiger Reserve in India. This is also tropical semi-evergreen forest. It's really interesting because the primate density there is very low and it doesn't have many species. And so the frugivory community there is dominated by birds and civets and deer. I'm not speaking about the birds today, just the mammals though. And then Hoi Kakeng Wildlife Sanctuary in Thailand. And this is really different forest. It's a mosaic of different dry forest. It has evergreen forest in the higher elevations. It's really rich in megafauna. It has 3 species of wild bovids. And the reason we're working there is actually to try and get information on the bovids because it's a real gap in our knowledge currently. So first of all, Belum. Again, this is the work of Lisa Ong. And it's a very unusual network because most networks concentrate just on endozoochory. So here, Lisa included stomatochory and synzoochory into the seed dispersal network as well. And it was built using local ecological knowledge. It's a pretty amazingly diverse network. It has 1,360 unique interactions. So what I'm showing you here is the species strength from the network. So species strength is a network metric that includes the number of plant species dispersed and the frequency with which they disperse them. So the higher the species strength, presumably the more important the animal actually is in the community. So you can see of the most important animals, the megafauna, the elephant is certainly one of them. But the other really important animals are the small mammals, like the primates, the gibbon, the macaques, and the rodents. And the ghao is the other megafauna there, and it's a little bit further down on the scale. So then we have Khao Yai in Thailand, and this is a more conventional network. It's built using camera traps, fruit tree watchers, and dungs. And this network is binary because it was built by many people over many years. And it's still big. It has 1,148 interactions. So it's still a pretty impressive network. And here I'm showing you the number of plant species dispersed because it's not a weighted network, so I can't show you species strength. And you can see immediately here, the elephant as the main megafauna there is way down on the scale of importance. There are ghao here as well, but we don't have any records of fruit consumption. So the elephant is not the last animal. There are many after it, but I couldn't show them all. So this is just animals that are handling more than 10 species. And the most important animals in this network are the gibbons, the macaques, the primates, bird species, and then again the rodents. And then we have Paki Tiger Reserve in India, and this is also built from camera traps and direct observations. This is the PhD work of Bibi Basu. So it's ongoing. Right now, we only have 62 unique interactions, and the bird data for the site has been collected previously, but I'm just here showing you the mammals. And I'm sorry, but it's the opposite way around. But here it's very different. Though again, the megafauna are pretty far down on the scale in terms of the number of plant species consumed. Although Bibi does tell me that when the elephant comes, it's really important for those species that it does eat. But at the top end of the scale are again the murid rodents, the barking deer, the samba, and probably the civets. So this asterisk just is there because some of these species are probably also destroyed at times. I don't have the fully resolved data at this time. And then we finally have Hoi Ka Keng Wildlife Sanctuary in Thailand. Again, this work is ongoing. It's built from terrestrial camera traps, but it's a very different, most of the community is actually terrestrial mammals. So it's still representative of what's happening. And there's only 29 unique interactions at present on this community. And here, again, it's very different. It's the muntjak and the samba deer really dominating what's happening in this community in terms of seed dispersal. And then it's probably the bovids and the elephants. There's a lot of elephants there, but they're really not eating much fruit. So let's bring all these 4 communities together just to see how they compare. And you can see clearly that the importance in the communities is very site specific. These are actually almost the same set of animals across all these communities, but their relative roles really differ. And so in Belum and Hoi Ka Keng, you can see the megafauna play quite an important role, probably. But in the semi-evergreen forests of Khao Yai and Paki, it's a different group of animals, and the megafauna are not playing dominant roles. And this is probably due to the fruiting phenology, the climate, whether there's a steady supply of fruit, what else these other animals have to eat, and how well it can support the frugivore communities. So, what is the main role of megafauna in seed dispersal? Clearly, the very important long-distance seed dispersers. And even if there are some plant species they eat very occasionally, they might be the only animals actually moving those seeds from population to population. Whereas local seed dispersal is mainly by smaller, more frugivorous animals. They're definitely important overall in some habitats, and it'd be very interesting to identify what the factors are to know which habitats these are. They're also important for some large seeded species and large fruited species as well, or these mega fruits. And I have data on that, I just don't have time to show it, but they can dominate the dispersal of these species. So I just want to speak briefly about these mega fruits or these megafaunal syndrome fruits that we also like to eat often. So these are these very large fruits that are considered to have evolved for dispersal by megafauna. Usually the cutoff is around 40 millimeters wide, and it's considered they've evolved because large seeds have a competitive advantage. And if you've got a large seed, you need to be a large fruit, so you need a large animal to eat it. But it's important to keep in mind that many of these megafruits are actually small seeded, so it can't explain everything. So a couple of years ago, some colleagues and I, including Lisa and Ahimsa, we collated the information on megafruits across tropical Asia. We found around 500 species across diverse families and orders, showing that it had evolved independently multiple times. And so this map just shows you the diversity across the regions we delineated across Asia. And we found that megafruit diversity was related to megafauna diversity, especially when you considered the extant megafauna. And it was interesting in terms of the traits because we found fruit size was related to megafaunal diversity, but seed size was related to climatic variables. So what this suggests is that the seeds get big for environmental reasons. It's better to be a large seed. And then it either has to be a large fruit or attract a passing elephant, or perhaps it gets big and attracts just a seed evolved for sinzukori, so it can be moved by a rodent as well. But if the fruit gets big independent of seed size, then it's probably evolved for dispersal by megafauna. So I just want to give you one brief example. This is the work of Balaram Awasthi, who was in Jin Chen's lab, recently completed his PhD. This is just a very small segment from his PhD, which I think shows this quite well. So Balaram studied the greater one-horned rhino and Melotus nudiflora in Nepal. Melotus is a megafaunal fruit. In some regions, it's a bit smaller in others, but it is very hard, which makes it difficult for other animals to eat it. So Balaram had 6 sites, one Chitwan National Park, which has always had rhinos and has rhinos in good density now, and then 5 other sites that were missing rhinos for 200 years. So Balaram's thesis was focused on reintroduction. So 2 sites had small reintroduced rhino populations, and the other 3 were paired sites with no rhinos. So I don't want to go into detail about what he did, but he basically came up with one value, a likelihood of a seed being dispersed in each of these sites. And he did this by combining, calculating what each animal was doing, and then coming up with a single figure. And this is what he found. So he found in Chitwan, which has always had rhinos and had good density of rhinos, they had a much higher likelihood of a seed being dispersed than all the other sites. And this was driven by rhinos because they dispersed more seeds, and a seed was more likely to germinate after it passed through a rhino gut. And then he measured the fruit in each of these sites, and he found that the fruit were also larger in Chitwan, which has always had rhinos and has a good rhino population now. And in those sites, which were missing rhinos for 200 years, the fruit were much smaller. And this is a very short generation past-lived tree. So this suggests, doesn't prove, but suggests, because this is a large fruited, small seeded megafaunal fruit, that indeed it has got bigger to attract rhinos, or sorry, to attract megafauna for its dispersal. And then in their absence, it's shrunk or got smaller, possibly to enable easier dispersal by smaller animals. So there is something interesting going on with one of the sites there, which actually has a lot of deer. So Asia is really interesting to study rhinos because it's a center of rhino diversification. And there used to be some really amazing rhinos across this region. And it's really important we don't forget the rhinos. Elephants do not eat Melotus nudiflora. So despite the fact they're in the same landscape, this is a species that is only dispersed by rhinos and not elephants. And in this paper, again, Lisa, Himser, and I, and some others published a couple of years ago, we wanted to consolidate the information on Sumatran rhino seed dispersal. And we had a couple of small studies we wanted to combine, and we looked at historical accounts. And we found some interesting differences with the Asian elephants. So we found that there were some small differences in fruit trait selection. We also found that 29% of the fruits dispersed by rhinos were not known to be dispersed by elephants, and 35% of the mega fruits dispersed by rhinos had no other known disperser. So this suggests there's important differences between rhinos and elephants. And that, of course, means that even if you've still got elephants as a megafauna in forests where there were once rhinos, things could still have been affected or changed. So this is my last slide. And this is again the work of Lisa Ong's PhD thesis. And I just want to, although we often focus our studies on individual animals, it's sometimes necessary to have a conservation message to support their, support conserving them. I think it's really important we don't lose sight of the fact that it takes a whole community to disperse a forest. And I think this picture shows this really well. So on the left here are the modules in Lisa's network. So a module is a collection of plants and animals which would interact with each other more frequently. And so at the top, we have the megafauna and the large herbivores. So indicating there are some overlap in their diets, they are dispersing some of the same species, interestingly also with bats. Then we have the rodents dispersing seeds by synzucori and stomatochori. The primates and carnivores are together. And then the birds are in one network here, but we didn't sample the bird community that well because we didn't sample the understory where it might have shown some more diversification. So very clearly, no one animal can do all this. No 10 animals can do all this. And if we are going to conserve these forests, we have to focus on this whole communities as well and their respective different roles. And of course, this is just seed dispersal, one of the many important processes going on in these forests today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. So we'll pass to our second speaker, Dr. Nadine Ruppert. So then she's the head of the Primate Research and Conservation Lab at the University of Science, Malaysia. Nadine is a primatologist and a conservation practitioner working in Peninsular Malaysia. And her work focuses on the behavior, ecology, and adaptations of primates in human-shared landscapes to find long-term strategies for mitigating negative interactions. Nadine is a senior lecturer and is the vice president of the Malaysian Primatological Society, the head of the Macaca Nemestrina project, and a member of several IUCN specialist groups focusing on primates. Let me just prepare the slides. Yeah, the title of her presentation is going to be Primates, Pesticides, and Palm Oil, an integrative One Health approach to foster wildlife-friendly plantation management.
Okay, thank you very much, Ahimsa, and thank you everybody for coming. Thank you to IC-XTBG for inviting me here. It's my first time in China, and I'm really excited to be here. Thank you also, Ahimsa, for telling this long title, so I don't have to say it again. So I'm going to talk today about the species that I've been studying for many years and focus my talk on what I have found in these 10 years of studying the pigtail macaques. But I want to give you a bit of brief introduction first to the research group and what we've been doing, because it's oh, I have the slides here. Awesome. It's actually the first long-term research on this particular species of macaques in the world, I would say, because there have been several studies being conducted, especially also in the 80s, that I want to mention Dr. Julian Caldecott, who was the pioneer studying the species. But since then, really nothing much has been studied on the southern pigtail macaques, Macaca nemestrina. And I found out why, because it's particularly difficult to habituate that species if you do not provide them any food. And what we were doing was following the species with radio collars, and it took us 2 years to habituate one group. So I just want to give you a scale of the amount of work that goes into doing some of these long-term ecological studies on some of the species, in particular primates. My interest first actually was seed dispersal. So I'm very glad I also have been known Kim for some time. And I have started studying seed dispersal during my PhD and then came to do many other things. And I'm going to show you a few of these things along the way. So if you're interested, please go to the website and find out more information. The current team, and I want to give credit where credit is due, because that could not have been done by one person, but particularly one person is important for the data that you will see today, and that is Anna Holzner. So the current core team are countless students and field assistants, volunteers who we thank already, but of course we are, Anna, me, then my postdoc Nurul, Isa, Celine Ng, who's a master student. She's hopefully graduating next month. Miriam, who's started her PhD just a couple of months ago. And then from USM, Dr. Noshahida, and the very, very important leader of all these fantastic people is my close colleague and friend, Prof. Anja Widig. So here are faces to the names that I have just given you. And of course, there's one face that might be familiar, and he's sitting in the back. That's Naufal, who's now at XTBG. He's joined us, I think, in 2022 or 2021. It was like during COVID, on these lockdowns and the very terrible time for doing research in the field. He became a field assistant for some time. And I think there were more than, I would lie if I say I know the exact number, but 80 to 100 different short-term volunteers, field assistants, students who came for internships, and just the experience of being in the field with us who have contributed. So thank you very much to all of them. Now, we are situated in Peninsular Malaysia, and that's on the west coast. There's a small forest. It's less than 2,000 hectares of a part that is virgin jungle, and another part that is basically reserved for timber extraction. It's called Permanent Forest Reserve, which is a bit misleading. It's not a protected area per se. And in this landscape, as you see here on the map, that is surrounded by oil palm plantations, we have managed to habituate two distinct groups. They are still considered one population. They are overlapping. But within the last, I would say, since 2012, but it took a bit longer to take good quality data. So I would say maybe within the last only 9 to 10 years, we've been collecting data on their behavior. You see the home ranges, they're overlapping. They're actually not very small. They're less than 1 hectare inside. Now, some of the publications here, I just give you an overview because the data that I showed today, I'm not going to go so much into the science and the methodology and the statistics because I don't have too much time, but you can always ask me and refer to the publications from the project. You see some of the first publications were actually about seed dispersal. So coming back to like connecting me and Kim while we are here for this special seminar today. And the topic that I actually want to talk to you about today is the things that we found them doing in oil palm plantations, which were quite surprising. First of all, when we started the project, we only could follow them in the forest. They would not lead us out into the open plantation area. And that was because they were not habituated well enough to us. And I think the forest just gives more protection. But the longer we were able to follow them, the more we actually learned about their, I would say, real behaviors, and that is the use of oil palm plantations as foraging grounds. Now, I think everybody here knows that agricultural expansion, be it oil palm or any other cash crop like soy, has given huge impacts on wildlife in general, worldwide, not just now talking about oil palm and primates in Malaysia, but that's a general threat to many, many wildlife species that now have been threatened. And of course, it's all about the habitat degradation, which comes, there's fragmentation, there's also access to humans who then may be more inclined to poach or hunt some of these animals. And especially for primates, it's also something that we often maybe overlook is actually not just poaching for bushmeat, for example, for consumption, but particularly as pets, because many of these primates are very cute as babies, and people, they maybe like to have this, feeling of they have an exotic pet, they have something special. So opening landscapes and fragmenting habitat of wildlife obviously comes at huge cost to many of these species. And especially Malaysia is known, is famous for its agricultural expansion of oil palm plantations. Malaysia is the second largest producer of oil palm. And it's also, not coincidentally, but it's also a very high biodiverse, top biodiverse country in the world, because obviously oil palm grows best in tropical countries that are biodiversity hotspots. I'm pressing. Oh, okay, wrong button. Okay, now of course, oil palm, and I think many of you know, is very important for the local economy of many of these countries. It's very high yield. It's once you have established plantations, it's relatively, and I say relatively, it's not very work intensive, maybe compared to other crops. These palm trees, they can grow over many, many decades. They are harvested up to 20 years. They produce fruits all year round. And the economic output has led to substantial development of many of the producing countries. So it's a very important driver of local economies. However, as we know, these monocultures do damage to tropical ecosystems. And many of these threats are not just due to maybe the loss of habitat itself, but due to how monocultures are managed. And today I'm going to focus on one particular issue, which is pesticides. And when I say pesticides, I want to include different aspects here, which includes herbicides or insecticides and also rodenticides. These are the rat poisons and maybe other pollutants. And I'm going to be a bit broader here because in the end of my talk, you will see that we are not yet sure what causes some of the things that we are seeing in our plantations. So southern pigtail macaques, they are only found in Sumatra, the Malay Peninsula. This is southern Thailand and Malaysia. And also on Borneo, which is Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesian part, Kalimantan. They thrive in forest habitat. Now, this is very important for the next few slides because I don't want to give the misconception that they do extremely well in oil palm plantations. They are using plantations as foraging ground, but they need forests in order to conduct all their social activities, for sleeping, for additional food. Of course, they are highly frugivorous, as Kim has mentioned. What we found, though, and this was one of the surprising discoveries, is while they are like foraging in oil palm plantations, they don't necessarily consume so many oil palm fruits. They are very specific on one particular item, and this is rats. And they are not opportunistically catching rats, they are actively hunting and looking for rats during the day in oil palm plantations. And as I said, it was quite surprising because macaques are not particularly known to eat a lot of meat. Maybe we hear about stories from chimpanzees, but not necessarily from macaques. You know, stories where, and I've seen that earlier, maybe small birds or small reptiles, of course, they're part of the diet as well. But these rats, they are huge in size, as you can see here on the photo. Now we have made an assessment qualitatively and quantitatively, and counting the impact they have on the oil palm yield. And you can read this in more detail in the paper. But what we found is that they are causing less damage than expected by consuming oil palm fruits. And in fact, the yield loss they're causing is less than 0.04% per year in that area. However, one group of macaques consumes around 3,000 individual rats. And if you compare it to other biological pest control species, like, for example, barn owls, who are eating many, many, many more rats per individual, it is still important to understand the difference between, for example, barn owls and the macaques, because barn owls, they forage at night. They're night active. They are ambush predators. They're flying over the open plantation ground to catch rats that are maybe running on the ground. However, the macaques, they use a different ecological niche. They're foraging during the day. They are taking the rats out from the tree bark. They're looking for them in these cavities. So they're complementing barn owls and maybe other biological pest control species in these plantation areas to reduce rats, which cause up to 10% of oil palm yield loss per area per year. So we calculated the economic impact, and as you can see here on the slide, one group actually helps farmers in terms of economy or monetary impact by providing additional services. So the loss of rats that they reduce, it does impact the amount of yield, which increases, and in terms of money, that would be equivalent to $100 per hectare per year. now we're talking money. And this, again, is very important for talking conservation to people who are interested in cash crops. So I'm coming to this in a second as well. However, the positive impact they have on plantations, and not being misunderstood again, saying like, we want to promote them as pest control species, we want to introduce them to plantations like barn owls. It has triggered some responses from people when we talked about this. They say, oh, we can catch some macaques and release them to our plantation area. They can catch rats. And I say no, because they have to have a forest nearby. They have to have access from forests into that adjacent oil palm plantations. And also, if they are foraging in plantations, it's not clear yet what are the impacts of the plantations on the animals themselves. And this is where we found several indicators of maybe some problematic health issues. Now, what is One Health? I think many of you have heard the term. It's not new, but still a relatively emerging field in science, not even science, in conservation and public health. It's a kind of everything. The World Health Organization has defined One Health, the term, as an integrated and unifying approach to balance and optimize the health of people, animals, and the environment, mobilizing multiple sectors, disciplines, and communities at varying levels of society to work together. Now you see it's kind of everything. And in this diagram, you even see the fourth sphere, which is plants. So in a very nutshell, you can say it's the interspheres of the human, animal, and ecosystem health. And it requires multiple stakeholders to work together. These are the scientists, the conservation practitioners, but also anyone related to one of these particular fields. It's about environmental education, it's about public health, the sector or the people that are working there, and everything in between. And you can see maybe why I'm talking about One Health, because when we talk about these integrated issues at the human, animal, and ecosystem intersections, now we have macaques foraging in oil palm plantations, you have animals, you have the ecosystem, and of course you have human interactions, and especially in these plantations where there's a lot of workers and other people also coming in. Now, some important topics, and by far not all, but maybe related to what I'm talking about, is food safety. That's a huge topic in One Health. Promotion of health and integrity of ecosystems, that's self-explanatory. And also the emergence of infectious diseases. And I think since COVID-19, we are all very aware about the risks and how the conservation of habitats is directly related to some of the zoonotic disease transmission risks that we are seeing worldwide. So for my talk today, and I'm probably going to be over time already, I know this. The research aim is actually to investigate potential effects of oil palm plantation use of these macaques on the health of the animals who are using these plantations. Now, I just want to give you a perspective here. The study groups that we are following them every day since 2010, but maybe good data we can collect since 2014. And in these 10 years, it's a long time, we have seen them entering plantations almost every day. And on average for about two hours per day. So of course there's 1-2 days they don't enter the plantations, but on average you could say almost every day without miss. When we don't find them in the forest, we'll patrol the forest edge to the plantations and try to find where they are, because they will come out at one point. So it's a very interesting behavior itself, because these plantations, obviously, they would also give them maybe additional food sources, as we have already seen, but the ability to survive in this relatively small forest, as it's only 2,000 hectares, it's a dipterocarp forest. So Kim has mentioned about the relative food scarcity or fruit scarcity in these forests. However, they seem to have an additional, what we call maybe something like food provisioned landscape or habitat, which are these plantations that are fruiting all year round or providing food all year round. So One Health, you saw the 3 perspectives. Today I'm focusing on the animal perspective. So the aim is to understand what's the impact of these plantations on the health of macaques. And first of all, what I'm going to show is a chemical assessment of herbicide loads in the food of the macaques. And the food does include the rats, but also the oil palm fruits and the macaques themselves, which will be quite interesting. Infant survival, as you see here, that's a mother and her baby. And this is an important determinant of fitness for the population in the long run. And a gut microbiome assessment. So is there any impact of pesticides, or let's say of different anthropogenic food items actually that could affect the gut microbiome of these species? So these are like items or like topics related to health in the animals. And of course, in the long run, we are also focusing, or we would like to focus more in the future on the environmental perspective, which is general health of the plantation. So in terms of pollutants, and also the human perspective. So one item would be understanding what oil palm farmers know and understand about the economic impacts these macaques cause on plantations. And a very maybe future perspective would be also assessing the human health of people who work in these landscapes. Now, of course, it's a bit more difficult to work with humans in terms of ethics and permission. So that's, as I said, oh, I'm sorry, it's a long-term prospect. So why would we even start bothering looking at all of this? And you see here is an assemblage of photos that we have taken during the past years that gave us some, cumulatively, I would say, some concerns, because one animal shows up that has signs of poor health, and you would not think about anything particularly strange going on. But if in the long run, many animals show up having similar, and I call it symptoms, then we started thinking about, is this normal, or is this something that could be related to these animals using agricultural landscapes? We see animals who are born with facial deformities, and this is something that is published in other papers that has been seen in chimpanzee populations in Africa who are using landscapes that are affected by pesticides. We see animals that have developed tumors, especially in females, that are infertile, which is quite rare in primates, wild primates, that they're infertile, and just generally also often very poor body condition, health, body weight that is deteriorating very fast, and then young, usually healthy animals disappearing or dying. So over like 10 years, these incidences have become more and more frequent, and we thought we have to investigate this a little bit further, and made an assessment about, this is our study population. There was a decline in the number of individuals in these groups, as you see, almost by 50% during the past years, as well as very high infant mortality. And it is concerning. I'm talking about infant mortality here because in wild primate populations, for those species or populations where there has been research that's published, the average mean infant mortality would be around 10%, less than 10% actually. But in our study population, we had an mortality of almost 60% over the past 10 years. And in some years, none of the infants survived their first year. So why could this be? What would you think are the risks living in plantations? Of course, it's a lot of different impacts that are happening there, and threats that I'm going to show you in a second. But in fact, what we thought is maybe because it's an open environment and the mothers are not protecting their infants, they're all like being like less close to their moms, so they're maybe more prone to ground predators. There's a lot of feral dogs and other immediate threats that are in these plantations. So maybe it's because the moms are not particularly taking care of the babies, but it's actually the other way around. The high mortality we see is despite the increased protection of mothers in these plantations. And the mother's protectiveness, we studied it by basically the onset of what we call contact time between the infant and the mother, is high despite is strongly influenced by the habitat type. that these macaques are ranging in. So the habitat is the virgin jungle and also the plantation, but we're including a third, wouldn't say habitat type, but a third area they're using very commonly, and that is the edge between the plantation and the forest, which they use after their plantation visits, after they have eaten, to basically hang around, to groom, to socialize, and to spend time there. Now, what you see on the graph is the body contact time, and generally it decreases with the age of the infant, and the onset would be around 3 months of age of the infant, where the mom just gives them more and more alone time, allows them more space apart from the mother, and of course still in reach, where she can grab the baby, but it's not the all the time 100% carrying and body contact. And when you look at the individual infants, and we follow the individual infants and looking at basically their lifespan within the first 180 days, how much time they spend with the mothers. The contact time, the onset of the decrease of the contact time was later, the higher the plantation use of these individuals was. So translating it into the moms, they spend more time in close contact with the babies, the more time they're spending in plantations. So they are protecting their infants. So this is not the cause why infants are dying. Now, there's other factors, other threats, obviously, in plantations. And we just call it the risky environment. There's a lot of different things that we can consider. We have run a study looking into how, like this, the infant mortality, how does this play out? How does it look like? And have looked at 2 test predictors for this risky plantation environment. And one is basically the time the macaques spend in the plantation. And that's a proxy for the degree of the exposure to these immediate risks that I've mentioned just now. There's feral dogs, there's humans, there's maybe other predators. And there's also high intragroup or intragroup aggression. So in the plantations, we saw that as well, that the males especially are very prone to fighting. And so, of course, often infants get kind of caught up in the middle of these very aggressive fights. And the second predictor, no, it's not working. The second predictor is time since the mother's previous birth. So infants who are born to primiparous mothers in many species are often not surviving the first year because the mom is not experienced enough, because she's not strong enough, she doesn't produce milk yet. So it's something we see in many species. The first baby to a first-time mother may have lower chances of surviving the first year. But we also looked into basically the time, the interbirth interval, the time span between 2 births of a mother who already had more than 1 baby. And why we looked at that was because we found papers published that some of these herbicides that are used commonly in agricultural or in monocultural agricultural landscapes, having the potential to accumulate in the body. They can cross the placental barrier, and they can also basically be not saying ingested, what's the word? They come into the baby's body throughout, of course, the development during the pregnancy. And then they are transferred. I mean, sorry, this is what I was looking for, the word. They are transferred to the fetus. And so that is an immediate decrease of the pesticide load in the mom's body. And when the baby is born, it's basically a way for the mom to get rid of the pesticides. Of course, that's a very non-scientific way of explaining it. But the pesticides that are carried with the baby, they might have had long-term effects. And of course, they might increase the risk of the infant being not surviving the first year. Sorry, this thing is a bit confusing. All right. So what we saw is that the macaques who spend extended time in the plantation during infancy have a higher likelihood of not surviving the first year, which is indicated here with the red graph. Now, if I can use this, this is now okay. We're looking here at the slides. So this is by the red line indicated. And we used an average of 2.9 hours because this is the time, as I have mentioned, that they usually spend in plantations throughout the year. This is the 10 years data that we had. So anyone who spends, the individual who spends more than that during their lifetime or during the motherhood time in the plantations, the infants born to these mothers, they had a higher chance of not surviving the first year. It's not very surprising when we consider the immediate risks in these plantations. What was surprising was to see that the second predictor was the mom's own experience, which is primiparous mothers, and also the interbirth intervals. They are giving also very high significance in predicting whether the baby survives or not. Now, again, primiparous mothers, not very surprising. Maybe they're not very well, they are not yet trained well enough to take care of their babies. However, when you look at the interbirth intervals, and I'm trying again to use this. No, what happened? That wasn't me. Go backwards? Ah, okay. I should stop using tech. All right. What was actually surprising to see was that the longer the interbirth interval between in a particular individual mother between a baby and then the second or consecutive baby, that second baby not surviving also predicted the longer the interbirth interval basically was a predictor for the chances of the baby not surviving. And this is not what we see in other species or what we would expect basically, because the recovery time between two births, the longer it is, usually gives a higher chance of the second infant being born healthy with enough resources and surviving. It was the other way around in our study. And that caught us actually by surprise. And when you go back, just thinking about what I have said with the pesticide load, the higher the interbirth interval, the more time the mom has to accumulate pesticides, which then can be loaded onto the fetus. Or even many of these chemicals, they can only be transferred via their fat soluble. So they can only be transferred maybe via milk. So the baby nursing may have also basically ingested pesticides through the mother's milk. These are all hypotheses. This is not data that we can confirm. These are ideas that I will bring forward. But this is the thing. So what's the cause? Why is this happening? Why do we see this? And are pesticides really responsible for this? So we are now coming into a part of the presentation where we have done a lot of pilot studies, a lot of like preliminary assessments. All of this, please, it's not published. These are hypotheses. These are first kind of like data sets where we try to see what's the future direction of this research. So please don't share this in the future. And just bear in mind, again, this is maybe, it's all preliminary and this might change. So the objective is to detect herbicides in the plantation environment, the macaques themselves, so also their food, which is the, as I have mentioned before, rats and water and oil palm fruits. And also the environmental components are liquid samples from the plantation. So for example, the water in the puddles and the, how do you call this in English? The irrigation areas there, and volatile samples. Now we are sampling the macaques by actually assessing their body odor, their smell. Because some of the chemical products, they can be, when they are ingested or when they are digested, then they produce certain chemical molecules that we can detect and then sample via GCMS. Okay, so the methods we're testing trial is looking into these volatile samples using TD tubes and the BIVOC 2 air pump. And again, I'm really scared clicking here now. Okay, you can see here, this is Anna. And this is one of our macaques. And she has this pump carrying it in the rainforest, which is very densely, the vegetation is very dense. She's carrying this heavy equipment. A silicone hose, at the end is a TD tube. And now this macaque has to sit still for at least 30 seconds, where she's sucking in the body odor of the macaque. And the idea is to find whether these chemical compounds that we're looking for that indicate the exposure to pesticides in the plantation can be seen in the macaques. So meaning they had been exposed and they had ingested them. I just want to show you how we tried to train the macaques, because again, there's a lot of work going into this, and this is maybe something people often don't realize. The macaque has to sit still for 30 seconds, otherwise we can just throw away the tube, and they are very expensive. And the macaques cannot touch or come too close or do anything in physical contact with the tube itself. So it's only allowed to be in contact or in touch with the air. And here we go, this can be discarded. So it took many, many, many trials, and still working on that. But Anna has now, this stick is almost 2 meters long, and tried to do this in a very densely vegetated rainforest. Of course, there's twigs and sticks and everything in between. So the sampling methodology includes, of course, as I have mentioned, these different items. And then what we actually want to look at is when plantations are being sprayed with herbicides. And we're going to sample all these items. He's looking at the watch already, I'm over time. Before the actual pesticide treatment, and then 1 week after, and 3 weeks after the plantation treatment with pesticides. And then using GCMS and a certain type of analysis is called analysis of variance using distance matrices, ADONIS, if chemical profiles of these 3 treatments differ. And we call it a random forest analysis, which is a statistical analysis, has nothing to do with the forest we're in. It's just, maybe some of you are very familiar with that. And it is to identify the substances that differ most between these 3 conditions. Now, the first is the ADONIS assessment. You see, we have 2 different types of herbicides that we tested, and I'm not allowed to give like a disclosure of what it is, but the plantation we are working with, they have given us their pesticides, like the schedule and the amount, and also the chemicals that they're using. And we found no significant effect in the different types of treatments before, 1 week after, and 3 weeks after pesticide treatment of the plantations. So these chemical profiles of rats and fruits that we sampled, they look very similar. There's no significant difference. However, for the macaques, the body odor, the long stick, and sucking in the air around those macaques, we saw a significant difference in the 1 week after plantation treatment. So 1 week after the plantation has been sprayed with pesticides, macaques show a significant different composition of their body odor compared to before and 3 weeks after. And further analysis is currently running. Again, this is all very preliminary. We don't know if the pesticide that was sprayed is actually causing the effect. So we see there's an effect, but we don't know what causes it. So this is where now we are in the midst of trying to assess whether that effect, which is caused by what we call substance X, is really caused by that type of herbicide that was used. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but it seems that something is going on. The next thing is like sampling the liquid samples. And again, here you see macaques are drinking water. We're also sampling the urine of the rats, because macaques are feeding on the rats. Rats are also exposed to all these pesticides. They're using the same environment, and they're easier to sample than catching the urine of rats. Of the macaques, I'm sorry, which is also quite difficult. So this is coming up. And from the animal perspective, that when we're talking about this One Health assessment, we would like to see in the future whether there's an impact of pesticides on the particular gut microbiome and gut health of these species, or particularly the macaques that are using the plantations, but we can include rats and other species that we can capture. And if there's basically also a relation to parasite load. And when we're looking at the gut microbiome, the species composition of pathogenic bacteria and other potential pathogens that are taking part or playing a role in disease transfer potential. And when you look from the behavioral perspective, individual macaques, they're using plantations differently. Some are foraging more, some are foraging less. So is this behavioral plasticity also playing a part in the individual pesticide load, and also maybe then related to parasites and the gut microbiome and the health condition of these macaques? There's a lot of things that can be done. Environmental perspective, herbicides load in plantation, water, soil, all these things we haven't really assessed yet. Heavy metals that are also found in the area. Antibiotics, there's poultry and livestock farms around that might also be consumed by the macaques. and the farmer's perspective or human perspective. Basically, we have done a questionnaire that is also being analyzed at the moment about how people perceive these macaques, how they interact with them, if they know that they are beneficial for pest control and things like that. Now, quickly, an outlook we have started, and this is data from my master student, Celine Ng. She has looked into the gut microbiome of two populations. One is the oil palm forest population that I've just shown you. And another one is a few kilometers away in an urban landscape that are highly provisioned with human food. And we have found in the gut microbiome 21 different phyla of bacteria, and that the diversity is different between the two populations, one that is heavily provisioned with human food and one, the oil palm forest natural population. So there are differences in terms of gut microbiome diversity. Quickly, these other species that have zoonotic potential or that are listed as opportunistic pathogens that we found and that we want to explore further. And the goal, oh, this is the last slide on this. And the goal really is to see whether some of these species have also zoonotic potential for disease transfer, especially if there's a lot of interactions between humans and macaques in these landscapes. Okay, last slide. The long-term goal and why is this important for conservation really is that, of course, we want to mitigate these existing interactions between people who are directly in contact with the macaques in these open agricultural landscapes and somewhere else, like in the urban environments. But when we come back to the agricultural landscapes, the fragmentation of forests and habitats in these landscapes, of course, is a big issue for many species, not just for macaques. Orangutans, elephants alike, they are all impacted by the disconnectivity that is caused by oil palm plantations in Malaysia. So we would like to use the data that shows that macaques play a beneficial role in plantations to show to farmers that they should actually protect forests nearby and make these landscapes more diverse and encourage them to establish wildlife corridors that are not only beneficial for the farmers who actually might save money because macaques give them these ecological services through their biological pest control roles, but of course, which allow other species to cross through plantation areas. And in terms of macaques and other biological pest control agents, of course, it would be very convenient and very good for them not to be exposed to any harmful chemicals. So pesticide-free manual weeding could be established instead of these herbicides, and just generally looking into a more integrated pest management approach in these vast monocultures. And this all ties up with the sustainable production of palm oil. So many of you may have heard about the roundtable for sustainable palm oil. On Malaysia, we have a certificate specific to the country, which is Malaysian sustainable palm oil. And of course, they're already implementing many of these ideas, but on a large scale, this would be the future that I wish for these animals. But does, when you think about it, does really provide like a win-win situation for everyone. Because if it's healthier, if it's less costly, and of course, if it's from a landscape perspective integrated, and then animals can also use these landscapes unhinged or unhindered, everybody is winning. So this is my last slide. And I thank you very much. Coming back to the pet trade, this is why people do not ever have primates as pets, please. But they are very, very cute. I want to thank all of you, and of course, particularly the funders that are on the slides, and also the agencies that allowed us to do this research, and particularly in yellow, just some names: Marlene, Henriette, Nicole, Claudia, and other people from University Leipzig who are involved. So thank you very much. And sorry for being overtime, like usual.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kim and Nadine. And thank you to the audience. So then we have people online in Zoom and co-share. So then people online can post the questions. If you post questions, please indicate who you are, your affiliation, and then we will read the questions to Kim and to Nadine. And of course, people in the room, if you have any question, just raise your hand, and then we'll take the question. I think it's fine.
Cute macaque, okay.
I think it's fine with the cute macaque. Yeah. So we have a question. Let's start from the room. So then, Kyle.
Hi, thank you both for two interesting talks. I'll ask a question to each of you. Firstly to Kim, does the relative amount of foraging by mega herbivores have something to do with the crop sizes? And have you looked at that or not? Does the relative amount of foraging by mega herbivores have something to do with the crop sizes produced?
Okay. It could do, but I think it's more about the species that they want to eat. And within that, perhaps some of those species that they don't eat so much of, perhaps is crop sizes. But what I see, it seems to be there may be some species they target. Otherwise, it seems to be if they pass by, they might eat it. So generally, they just don't eat so many species in so many habitats, in some habitats at least.
And then for Nadine, this is beyond your talk, but just looking at that system, I totally accept that herbicides are probably a huge problem, not just there in many systems around the world. Is there any kind of agro forestry kind of setup being used in these plant plantations where maybe they could have herbivores in the understory doing the cleaning? So they could have basically dual use from the forests, from the plantations.
In many areas I mean, as far as I know in Malaysia, but I think also in Indonesia, they're allowing cows to go into these plantations, like the people, especially if it's smallholder farmers near villages, they're actually using that as a ground for their own livestock, cows, to graze in these plantations, which again, if there's a lot of herbicides already been used, because these people are usually not the same people managing the plantations, we have an issue here as well. But it's something that should be considered then on a larger scale, is making it more accessible for people who are in the surrounding areas to have livestock going through the plantations, if it's safe for them as well.
Yeah, I just think that's a possible way of, it's a win-win situation, right? It is possible.
Yeah, Professor Tianjin.
Thanks for the two very nice talks. So I have two questions for Kim. First question is, you mentioned about the maximum dispersal distance for the megafauna, elephant and lion, which is very obvious. So is this non-distance a matter? I mean, if such kind of non-distance disperser do not exist, what's the real problem for the plants? Is there any scientific evidence to demonstrate this is really necessary? This is really critical?
No, that's a good question. I think in terms of genetic diversity, I don't know the literature that well. I don't think it's been connected to megafauna as such, but more in some other landscapes where there's different animals. But how much of it is theory and how much of it is proven, I'm not actually too sure. I would have to read up. I think a lot of it is theory, but it makes sense. It's like an important role if you've got, but then of course some plants, they won't grow so far from the location. Not every plant needs to long distance seed dispersal.
Second question is, you mentioned the megafauna for the elephant. They provide a service to the species. It's very site specific. Some sites you only have 2 plant species. The other sites you have more than 20 or 10. So what does that mean? That mean the elephant to the side, it's very optimistic. Well, basically, the move to this habitat, and that just provides service whatever needed. Or that means it's sort of kind of evolutionary history. So that kind of habitats may have a long history coexist with this megafauna. So why this heterogeneity exists, how to interpret this.
So this is one thing that really fascinates me. And one reason I'm interested in seeing how different communities come together. So I'm not sure, but I think that the frugivores are such reliable dispersers. And I think megafauna perhaps become more important when the frugivore population is not very rich. So like in dipterocarp forests, where there's long periods of scarcity, you can't maintain a good frugivore population. So perhaps in the herbivores, the carnivores, everything else becomes proportionally more important. But you need data from a lot of communities to show this. But I think it's more driven by what these more reliable seed dispersers are actually doing and how many are there. But that's just a theory.
Okay. I have one question for second speakers. So I just wondering, the macaw need to move to the oil palm plantation. Is that their forest home range is not big enough? I mean, or they're just happy to move out to visit this plantation?
That's a good question. I don't know if they're happy to move out, but we see them moving out every day. I would suspect that's our hypothesis, that the forest itself may not provide enough food because
some other families may only stay inside of the forest, right?
They may. We have not assessed every single group in the forest, but we see from camera traps as well that also other groups are entering the plantations. It's a surrounding area that is very big. Actually, the plantation land itself is almost bigger than the forest. So at the forest edges, there are several groups that we have not studied, but we know from camera trap data that they're also accessing the plantations. Now, we don't know if they are happy to do this or if it's a need for them. That's a good question, actually.
Okay, we'll take some questions from online, and we have a question for both of you from Anna Traveset. Hello, Anna. Good seeing you. Anna Traveset from the Mediterranean Institute of Advanced Studies in Spain. So Tukims is asking, what traits do you think that rhino fruits have that are not attractive to elephants? So that there's some fruits or these by rhinos.
A very hard question. so because there's really not much data on rhinos right now, but it was more, they ate a lot of small fruited, more capsular fruits, which the elephants were not eating when we compared that. Now, Melotus nudiflora, I think we don't really know why elephants. I think it's a surprise. So we don't really know yet. We need more rhino studies.
I'm happy to tell you that also the herbivory between Sumatran rhinos and elephants is extremely different. That's something we are working on right now. And question for Nadine, do you think that the high consumption of rats could also play a role in the macaque health and mortality by a pathogen transmission from the rats, not from the pesticides?
Yeah. That's a very good question. And actually, this is all interlinked. So the future perspective that I showed, it would be an assessment that we want to make is looking into the individual consumption, the macaques are feeding on the rats and how many rats, and are these rats affected actually by parasites? Are they infected? Are they carrying diseases? There's a long-term study that we can do with this, and it's very, very important to address these issues for looking into the community level of also these plantations as an ecosystem.
And we have a comment from Wehan from the University of Brunei to Nadine, say thank you for the talk. Hunting by pigtail macaques could be more prevalent than expected. In Sepilok, they were seen raiding and killing red giant flying squirrels in the artificial nesting boxes that were within reach.
Yeah, it could be much more prevalent. Our own problem that we are facing is that we only have these 2 study populations, and it's been very, very difficult to habituate them in a ecosystem that is not affected by humans. And I'm saying this, not saying that plantations are not used by humans, but they have not been provisioned with food, these macaques, by humans. In Sepilog, there is an indirect food provisioning because the macaques are also using the areas where sun bears and orangutans are provisioned in these rehabilitation centers. And so I would love to have another study population to see how prevalent this really, really is. That is similarly in ecology to our own population that is using oil palm plantations and forests, but is not food provision, to see if everyone is doing this or not. In fact, it could be very prevalent, but we don't have direct evidence so far. But that's a really nice observation, saying that they're also feeding on other small mammals. Don't know if it's nice, it's interesting.
I think we have another question for Nadine from online. So, do you think thermal imaging would help in use in exposure assessments or provide anything useful for environmental data during your study? So you think
thermal assessments, meaning
I guess
think,
it's using some kind of thermal cameras with drones or something like that. I don't know.
I understand. I think this is useful for animals that are active during the night. Because during the day, I think the difference in temperature between the body temperature of the macaques and the surrounding environment is probably not the difference is not high enough. And also we can observe them directly, so I don't really know if there's added value. But for nocturnal animals, this is really, it's a very important tool to use, is like thermal imaging, definitely. Maybe if you have ideas, contact me directly how this could be related. And I don't see the link at the moment, so you can always contact me to discuss ideas.
We have questions for a couple of extra questions.
How many questions?
One question.
So then I'll go for, so these megafauna fruits, at least some of they have other dispersal means, I guess, right? So how much of these 2 roles played in seed dispersal, and do we have any evidence when the megafauna locally extinct, how's the megafauna disperse trees, community or patterns?
Where they've been extinct for a long time, and often they're still there, but they're not dispersing well. So they do have backup systems generally. I've studied a few, but in areas where there are megafauna. And so some smaller animals can usually move them, but they don't do as good a job. They don't generally take it as far, or they don't eat as much. But generally, there is evidence that megafauna are doing a better job than other animals can do.
I have a follow-up question on this comment. So one of my concerns that with the increase of the network studies, everything's becoming very quantitative, and then there's a lot of focus on the links per se. But I think the quality of the seed dispersal is being missed. And it's not the same being dispersed by a rat 6 meters that being dispersed, 2 kilometers by something.
Unless long distance seed dispersal is not important to that species.
So I think it's something we need to think beyond just those metrics, because it's very exciting to get numbers, right? And they get metrics, but the quality of the dispersal is much more complex, and it's difficult to study that.
Hi, thank you both for the excellent talk. I have a question to Keen. So do you have any knowledge about the main frugivore guilds that are able to handle fruits in a way that they can take pieces apart, and then the concept and definition of megafauna fruit couldn't be applied? I'm asking that because in your case, you have network data, which is great, but I've seen many studies that use co-occurrence to infer frugivory and interaction. And this is actually a huge challenge because you cannot really disentangle what is really endozoochory. And I would like to know if you have any thought of how to handle it and which kind of frugivore yields are important to really think about it and handle in a different way.
So you're asking what other animals can move these. So I just came from the frugivory and seed dispersal meeting where they spoke about Artocarpus, jackfruit, being invasive. And I thought, you've got an invasive megafaunal fruit. Clearly, there's a lot of animals that are moving these species that are huge, and only an elephant can probably eat it whole. But clearly, other things are able to pick small chunks of it and move it. So there are a lot of animals. I studied bats for a while, and they can move mangoes all over the place. It's not really difficult. As Ahimsa said, the dispersal distances will change, but sometimes it's enough to keep the plant growing in the environment. So I also agree with Ahimsa that it's very complex, and we need more studies to understand exactly what these links are. But rodents can move them. There's species I've worked with in Thailand that the gibbons move it a lot, but they only like the fruit when there's not much. They only eat the fruit when there's not much else around. And the species still kind of requires megafauna to move it a lot in large numbers. So it's complex, but definitely they can be moved by others. And if an Artocarpus jackfruit can be invasive, then
Thank you.
Okay, we have time for 2 questions, one for Nafal and then for Professor.
Thank you for the talk. I have a question for Nadine, actually. So you mentioned that macaques has the potential as a biological pest control, and you hypothesize that pesticides can have like bad impact towards the macaque. But when we are like studying human-wildlife conflict, like I would like to know what are the costs and benefits. So actually, can macaques fully replace the role of pesticides in that plantation? And should the plantation actually stop totally using the pesticide?
So when I say pesticides, I showed you like different types of pesticides that I referred to, and one was rodenticides, which is the poison used to kill rats in plantations, also in rice fields. And in this case, the not just economic but also the biological cost of using these types of poisons are actually pretty high, because using rodenticides causes harm to many wildlife species, not just the target species, in this case rats, but the secondary poisoning of unintentional poisoning of other species that are using these plantations and then eating the baits. So from a conservation perspective, I would say yes, do not use these rat poisons because they can even sometimes harm people. Secondary poisoning is a huge issue. Now, can this be replaced fully by biological pest control species that are somehow either introduced, like barn owls, into the plantations, or allowed to come in from the forests nearby, like macaques and leopard cats and snakes and other species that are foraging on rats? And I think the more diverse these landscapes are, and the more forests and maybe buffer zones and corridors are being created or reforested in these areas, and the more species can come into plantations to hunt for rats, they could be replaced fully in the long term, because of course there's always potential for further conflicts that we might not see at the moment. Then elephants are coming in, then other species are coming in, tigers, then you have human wildlife conflicts that are beyond this scale of, now talking about pesticides. But in the short run, I think the less chemicals we're using anywhere in agricultural landscapes, and especially as you have mentioned, also herbicides playing this huge role in potential human health impacts, the more healthier we do our food production, the better for everyone, right? So at least there should be a start in stop using all these chemicals. Yeah,
thank you.
that's my point.
Last question for Professor Gao.
It's just an idea that came to me while we were talking here, is maybe one of the benefits of mega herbivores is actually that they open space for recruitment, because they cause a huge amount of damage to plant vegetation. And a lot of these other species are not doing that, right? So they might not just be dispersing large distances, but they're also creating opportunities for recruitment that wouldn't exist otherwise.
If the fruit needs space, right? If it needs a gap, then it could create that. But yes, there are so many different roles these animals are playing, and they will interact in interesting ways. But you mean if they create gaps and things as well?
Yeah,
right?
because they're such major herbivores. They really change landscapes,
Yeah,
right?
but
And
not every plant needs that gap, right? Some will
sure.
need to grow in shade as well. But no,
Yeah, if it hasn't been explored, I think it's something definitely worth
Yeah.
exploring, because I think even large-seeded species, they can sit there for years, but they'd certainly prefer it if there's light, right?
but they won't sit there for years because they'll get hammered by rodents and beetles and
Okay. Mhm.
and things. So yeah, but some species could really use mega herbivores in that way.
I guess that is more important in Africa than in Asia. I think there's not so much evidence that in Asia mega herbivores are opening space in a significant way. It might be the directional dispersal more important. So then taking the seeds to places that are open because they're going to gaps for feeding. So more than creating the gaps, just taking the seeds to these places could be.
I mean,
Could be
there's
more
been
important.
studies from the Americas where they've done exclosures in forests, and the understory vegetation is massively different with and without the exclosure.
Sure. You can include all the herbivores. Yes.
So I would say even though the canopy over top may be closed, it's very important for plants is the first few years, right? If they, maybe latter years are important as well, but it's clearly critical what happens in the first 2 years, right? If you get past that, then your long-term prospects of survival are much better, right? It's something we're thinking about.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So then thank you, Kim. Thank you, Nadine. Has been very interesting talk. So before closing, just let me tell the next integrative conservation webinar. That will be on Tuesday, 5th of November. And the speaker will be Dr. Noura Abdul Karim, who is the Deputy Director of Singapore Botanical Gardens. And the topic will be challenges to conserve Southeast Asian flora. So then I hope to see there will be also in person. So then you're welcome to join in person. Thank you very much for people in Zoom and co-share. And thank you to the speakers for the